If you look at the rankings of all the Mummy movies ever made, the one from 2017 will probably come in last place on all of them. So was that good? No, it was horrible. I'd rather talk about a Mummy movie that everyone loves. Welcome, I'm Stephanie. The Mummy is one of my most favorite movies, which I will deny ever admitting, because it doesn't make me sound sophisticated and smart. It's an adventure movie comparable to Indiana Jones, just dumb fun. I think someone said it's a sexy movie.
I think the film The Mummy is the ultimate litmus test for whatever your sexuality is going to be when you grow up. Because you could come away from watching The Mummy and you could say that you found any of the cast attractive, and you'd be right. Everyone would agree with you, without a doubt. It's a brilliant, beautiful, sexy film.
And I couldn't agree more. And of course, as the title might have clued you in, I'm not talking about The Mummy from 2017, but the one from 1999. So let's hop right in and answer the question. The Mummy, was it actually any good? We start back in 1279 BC in the city of Thebes. We don't get the year from the movie, but the pharaoh in power is Seti I, and he died historically in 1279 BC, and die he will in the opening of the movie. We are introduced to High Priest Imhotep and Pharaoh's mistress, Anck-su-namun. She is listed as Anck-su-namun in the character list, and I don't really know anything about Egyptian names, but after the problem of Stargate keeping the name Ska'ara straight, I guess the actual pronunciation is Anck-su-namun. I butcher names myself, but I'm also not Universal and I can't hire a speech coach. And apparently, neither could Universal. Anck-su-namun and Imhotep have an affair, and the pharaoh would rather like them not to do that. So when he found them cheating, they kill him, which is the natural thing to do. Pharaoh's guards are not happy with that, and after Anck-su-namun kills herself in the hope her lover will bring her back to life, they stop him, put a curse on him, and bury him alive. They also put some scarabs into his coffin so that he isn't alone in the dark, which is quite nice. When picking the curse, the Egyptians, known for being of Jewish belief, insert the 10 plagues of Egypt into it, which they read in the Torah, which in Christian belief will become the Old Testament. I never questioned that before, but to be fair, they mix Egyptian mythology and the Bible, as if it has always been this way, and if I want to stay true to my nitpicking, I have to mention it here. If Imhotep is ever awoken, he would unleash the 10 plagues of Egypt onto the world. You know, locusts, frogs, rivers of blood, boils, and pestilence. You know the story. We skip a few years and find ourselves in Hamunaptra, City of the Dead. It's 1923 and we meet our main hero, the American Rick O'Connell. He has joined the French Foreign Legion, who are currently defending the position from locals who are not happy of people digging in Hamunaptra, where Imhotep was laid to rest. Or rather, unrest. After the defeat of the Legion, Rick is hunted into a corner, but just when he is about to die, there are strange winds and the sand is moving in weird ways, so the locals just leave in fear. As Rick leaves Hamunaptra, he is observed by a mysterious people all in black. 3 years later, we meet Evie, a librarian, the curator she works for, and her brother Jonathan, who is a bit of a happy-go-lucky kind of guy. He has stolen a puzzle box with a map to Hamunaptra in it. The curator is very dismissive of the find and accidentally burns the part with Hamunaptra. After this, Jonathan confesses to Evie that he got the puzzle box from Rick, who is currently in prison. After some back and forth, Evie frees Rick, and they are off to Hamunaptra. They had to take the prison warden with them, as it was part of the deal to let Rick go. On the boat down the Nile, they run into some American explorers, Henderson, Daniels, and Burns, as well as an Egyptologist they hired, and Benny, a man that left Rick behind to die 3 years ago, as their guide. By the way, I'm not being rude calling people curator, warden, and Egyptologist instead of their names. They don't have names. The people in black attack the boat at night. They are after the map and the key. Evie doesn't know what key they are talking about. There's a lot of shooting and the boat goes up in flame. Luckily, when Jonathan is looking for his sister, who has already been saved by Rick, he can pick up the puzzle box an item they don't even know is relevant. Rick, Evie and Jonathan and the Warden end up on one side of the river, Benny and the Americans on the other. Benny has all the horses, but Rick is on the right shore. Both groups are racing to Hamunaptra and arrive at the same time, where they have a little race to enter the city. I find it astonishingly hard to believe that many men wasted their lives to find the city of the dead, as the curator has claimed in Cairo. This city is not really that hard to find. Yes, they wait for the sunrise to show them the way, but once the sun is up, the city can be easily seen. Maybe he just wanted to discourage them because, as we learn later, he is one of the people sworn to keep Imhotep dead. Down in the ruins, the Americans find the Book of the Dead and 5 canopic jars, one of them broken. Evie, Rick and Jonathan find a very juicy mummy, and the Warden finds a rather gruesome death. It is with the mummy Evie and Jonathan realize that the puzzle box is a key. It not only opens the box surrounding the sarcophagus, it also opens it as well, and later 2 books. This is the master key for all of Egypt. When Evie recklessly reads a passage from the Book of the Dead that night, the very juicy mummy, who turns out to be Imhotep, wakes up. And we get our first plague.
Locusts!
I'm sorry I have to use that audio clip here, but whenever I read the word, I hear it in Preston Jacobs' voice. It's like when someone says enchantment and you just think of the guy from Dragon Age. They run into the underground city for protection, but here they find a lot of scarabs trying to eat them, and last but not least, the mummy. Henderson encounters Imhotep first, and the high priest takes his eyes and tongue, as Imhotep has to kill the 4 people that were present when the book and the canopic jars were discovered. As I'm wearing glasses myself, I can confirm when you take off such thin glasses as Henderson is wearing, you become almost blind. In fact, we can cure blindness with very thin glasses. Your eye doctor is lying to you. I'm sorry I'm mentioning this, but this is a trope that should have never been established. After Imhotep has stolen very bad eyes, he can't really see that well. It can therefore be excused that he thinks Evie is Anaxunamun. But before they can kiss, Rick runs in and rescues her. They flee the city. Benny is being left behind, and as he is confronted by Imhotep, Benny tries different gods for protection, starting with Christian in English, Muslim, which I assume is Arabic, correct me if I'm wrong, Buddhism in Chinese, and then Judaism in, I assume, Hebrew, which Imhotep recognizes as the language of the slaves and offers Benny gold for serving him. Benny agrees. The scene is funny, and I love it, but I would also like to mention that language changes drastically over the centuries. If any of us would go back in time only 500 years, we would not understand the locals. Imhotep recognizing Benny's Hebrew as a language from over 3,000 years ago is sketchy. It makes more sense that Evie understands Imhotep as she had studied the language spoken in Egypt back then. In comparison, and even though Roland Emmerich is usually not bothered with reality in his movies, in Stargate, Daniel Jackson, who is fluent in ancient Egypt, struggles to communicate with the Abydonians. Our adventurers arrive in Fort Bryden in Cairo. Rick wants to run, but Evie insists on staying, feeling guilty for waking up the mummy and wanting to set things right, while Imhotep gets himself the rest of Henderson's body by killing him. Rick is having a drink with Jonathan at the bar, where we also meet Winston Havelock from His Majesty's Royal Air Force, apparently the only one left, and longing for a hero's death. While they have a drink, their glasses are no longer filled with whiskey, but with blood. This is the second plague. It just not only hits water, but apparently every liquid. Rick realizes Imhotep must be near and runs to Evie to protect her. As he reaches her, we get ourselves a little bit of thunderstorm, and not hail, but fire raining from the heavens, which is sort of the third plague. After Imhotep is distracted by a cat, and here they at least get a bit of Egyptian mythology in, our team, including the 2 still alive Americans, seek refuge in the Museum of Antiquities and get a little exposition by the curator and the mysterious man in black, Ardeth Bey. Let me clarify. The curator, the warden, and the Egyptologist don't get names. And for the only named Egyptian character, you chose an American name that is rooted in Christianity. How hard was it to get your hands on a list of Egyptian names in 1999? I'm sorry I'm being pedantic here, but the movie has a budget of $18 million. And you couldn't be bothered to call the Egyptian embassy, who I think would be thrilled to lend you a hand. I'm not even going for something special. Just call him Mustafa or Ahmed. I don't care that it is an anagram for death by Ra. This is just ridiculous. But let's move on. It is now clarified that Imhotep doesn't like cats. The animal, not the film, because they are the guardians of the underworld, but he will no longer fear them once he is fully restored. This is great, but law should be established before it gets relevant. Otherwise, it looks like you would like to explain something as an afterthought to prevent pedantic people like me criticizing you for it. It would have been better not mentioning it and trust that enough people in the audience can piece it together. The curator and Ardis also puzzle together that Imhotep doesn't think that Evie is Anaxunamun, but is supposed to be sacrificed to bring Anaxunamun back to life. Which is interesting, because when Imhotep tried to raise her from the dead right after she died, there was no sacrifice in sight. Maybe it depends on how long someone was dead. Apparently, raising Anaxunamun is now a good thing, because it gives them time to kill Imhotep, as it is now said that he is not immortal before his girlfriend is back. This scene really is explaining the past and figuring out the future, and I'm not talking about the characters, but sadly the writers. The sun then goes into total eclipse, which Ardis thinks means Imhotep is getting stronger. Then Jonathan quotes the Bible to make sure we all remember that the 3 days of darkness is the next plague. Rick then decides to bring in the Egyptologist to protect him, as Evie is safe as long as Imhotep hasn't killed the 4 guys present at the opening of the box. He forces Evie to stay at the hotel by locking her in the bedroom, tells the Americans to stand guard, and takes Jonathan to get the Egyptologist, which is a horrible plan. Jonathan is not really a hero, so if you want to save someone, you should bring a fighter. You should also not keep the 2 Americans together to make it easier for Imhotep. But what do I know? I never battled a mummy. They are too late to rescue the Egyptologist, so now the mummy has the Book of the Dead. And when he sees Rick and Jonathan, he opens his mouth and spit a swarm of flies towards them. They escape, but the mummy beats them to the hotel and kills Burns, who was guarding Evie. Imhotep then sneaks into the bedroom for some sexy time, but is interrupted by Rick, who holds the cat into his face. Imhotep runs away. They go back to the museum. So they were at the hotel in Fort Bryden. Then they go to the museum for exposition. Then they go to the hotel in Fort Bryden. Then they go to the museum because Evie believes the Book of Amun-Ra can defeat the mummy. And as the Book of the Dead was in the place where people believed the Book of Amun-Ra was, the Book of Amun-Ra must be where the Book of the Dead is supposed to be. That does make sense. However, why the back and forth? Just as they start their research, a crowd is walking towards them. It's the normal people who live in the city, being in trance and chanting. They have very clearly sores and boils, and for those of you who didn't pay attention in Sunday school, this is one of the 10 plagues, and Jonathan explains this as well. We are still missing Frog, Nuts, the death of livestock due to pestilence, and the death of the first son. And we will be missing those for the rest of the movie. Imhotep just didn't get around to them before he was defeated. A chase through the city follows, during which Daniels is killed by Imhotep. When our heroes are cornered, Imhotep promises to let her friends live if Evie comes with him, so she goes. Imhotep, however, has no intention of keeping his word, and the heroes escape through the sewers. The curator sacrifices himself to let the others escape. We are down to Rick, Jonathan, and Ardis, so time to stock up. They recruit Winston Havelock, who we briefly met before, and ask him to fly them to Hamunaptra. He is thrilled because he gets to help save the damsel in distress and might die a hero. Imhotep decides to travel by sandstorm. While Imhotep is preparing to resurrect his beloved, Rick, Jonathan, and Ardis make their way through the city to find the Book of Amun-Ra. Imhotep resurrects 2 of his mummified priests and tells them to wake the others and go after our trio. And then we get a continuity mistake. In one scene, Evie and Benny are standing in the back while Imhotep sends his minions after the guys. In the next, Benny is in the middle of the city and Evie wakes up bound to the stone bed next to the mummy of Anaxunamun. I couldn't find anything on the topic, but I seem to remember someone saying in an interview that there was a scene where Benny ran and Evie passed out, and they cut it out because it was unlike Evie to pass out from anything she would see, because not much faced her up to this point. Rick and Jonathan find the book, and when they get attacked by Imhotep's minions, Ardith seemingly sacrifices himself to give them time to run and defeat Imhotep. I say seemingly because that was what the scene was supposed to be, but director Stephen Sommers liked the character and actor so much that he basically brought him back from the dead in the final scene so he could be in the sequel. I don't mind that, I like the character as well. There's not much to say about the next bit. Then he starts bringing treasures outside and loads them onto a camel, which I guess means when they fled Hamunaptra, they just took the horses and left the camels there. And the camels didn't run off. Rick and Jonathan make it into the resurrection chamber and defeat Imhotep. They are safe, but just then Benny relaxes his back onto some mechanism and the city fills with sand and is slowly closing all the doors. They run to the exit, but Benny doesn't make it. He gets locked in the treasure room, and while he is surrounded by flesh-eating scarabs, the light of his torch dies. Apparently, Stephen Sommers didn't like the character and actor enough to give him just a fake-out death. Our trio meets Ardith for the last time, Rick and Evie kiss, and they ride into the sunset. I love this movie, I really do, but the plot is a bit of a mess. Do you need a sacrifice to resurrect someone or not? Is Imhotep fully restored and unkillable after he killed the 4 men there when the box of the Book of the Dead was opened? Or does he have to resurrect Anaxunamun as well? Does he think Evie is Anaxunamun, or was he just a bit confused in the beginning because he calls her that and he kisses her in her bedroom? And while I get that you put a curse on a box that contains the Book of the Dead, why is it that whoever opens it is the feast for Imhotep instead of the people who opened the sarcophagus and read the resurrection spell? Why is he dead when they find him? He was supposed to be undead, living in darkness forever. I shouldn't ask these questions. A good writer doesn't have to explain everything in detail. He just has to make sure his story doesn't bring up questions he can't answer. Any world building is just explained in exposition, and the few things they should have trusted us to realize ourselves are also just outright explained. On top of that, the movie tries to ground itself in reality. Seti I indeed ruled in Thebes. The French Foreign Legion was not in Egypt, but Rick explains his garrison traveled to Hamunaptra from Libya, which is where the French Foreign Legion was at the time. And yet they try to appear like Egypt mythology when they are more Christian mythology. Also, the 10 plagues of Egypt were not a curse put on people when they were buried alive. It was a punishment from God to force Ramses to let his people go. I'm not offended, I'm not even a Christian, it's just not grounded in anything. And quite frankly, when you choose to do the 10 plagues, it would be wonderful if you would actually do 9 of them and have the death of the firstborn son hang over Jonathan's head while they are trying to kill Imhotep. If you do the 10 plagues, then do the 10 plagues. There are also a few questions concerning motivation. Why would the ancient Egyptians place such a curse on Imhotep? Yes, they want him to suffer, but they made it so, should he ever be released, he would destroy the world. Yes, they placed guards, but they didn't do a very good job. Why did Evie and Jonathan bring the puzzle box? And furthermore, why did Jonathan step into a burning inferno to save it on the boat? They didn't know it was important. Evie and the Egyptologist are interested in the past. Rick wants Evie, and the rest want gold, which is fine, I guess, but the characterizations of the Americans doesn't go over that. I don't feel sad or happy when they die. I don't know them well enough to be sad, and they haven't done anything heinous enough to be happy. They are just cannon fodder. The curator's death meant more to me even though he had less screen time, but that is probably because I really like the actor, having seen him in countless movies and TV shows. So let's do this. The characters. Rick O'Connell, played by Brendan Fraser, is a lovable rogue adventurer comparable to Han Solo minus the character development. He stays the same person from beginning to end. It is hinted at that he wants to run from Imhotep, but he quickly changes his mind because he wants Evie, which I guess is his character motivation. Evelyn is played by Rachel Weisz. She is smart and sophisticated at the beginning, and she stays that throughout the movie. She is the brains of the operation. I guess the only thing she learns is that she shouldn't dismiss legends. Jonathan, played by John Hannah, is the funny sidekick. I could just list actors with the characters. There's not much to say about those characters. The actors are really good, and it is a joy to watch them portray those characters, but the characters themselves are rather weak. The screenplay was written by Lloyd Fonville, Kevin Jarre, and Stephen Sommers, who is also the director, and is a huge fan of the original Mummy movie. It seems clear to me that this was more about telling a mummy story with great visual effects than telling a good story. And looking at his writing credits, I fear I'm not the only one thinking that. Besides countless mummy movies and video games, he also wrote Van Helsing, which you can say a lot about, but I don't think it has ever been named as one of the best written movies. Sorry, Stephen, but I think you brought a lot to the table as a director, not so much as a writer. The music was composed by Jerry Goldsmith, who I know from his wonderful work on Star Trek, but that is by far not the only thing he wonderfully made. He also created the music to movies like The Omen, Planet of the Apes, Basic Instinct, Alien, and much more. His music underlines the movie very well. I think the bulk of the movie that wasn't carried by the actors was carried by the wizards at Industrial Light and Magic, and they definitely did some light and a lot of magic. This is John Andrew Burton Jr., and if you are watching making-ofs of any blockbuster movie from the 90s and the 2000s, you would see his face in all of them. This is at least how it feels like. ILM was known for pushing the standards just a bit further with every film they made, and you would be sure about one thing when watching one of the movies they worked on. The effects would be top of the shelf. At least if you don't pay too much attention to the battle droids in The Phantom Menace. Their creation of Imhotep was unbelievable at the time, and I think he still looks fine. Not perfect, the movie is 25 years old. I have seen worse CGI in modern movies. The Mummy is a roller coaster that is fun as long as you don't look at it too closely, and I won't let my stupid review kill the joy the movie brings me. You can like something that is objectively, well, let's not say bad, let's say that has flaws. The characters are brought lovingly to life by a wonderful cast. The movie switches from serious and creepy to top-notch humor without skipping a beat. It is light entertainment, and the work of ILM will bedazzle you. It is a movie made with love. So my final rating for The Mummy is, it's Indiana Jones with mummies, out of 10. If you like what you've seen, consider pressing my buttons and ringing my bell. Thank you for listening. Goodbye and good night.